Welcome to the Self-Belief Podcast, where we talk to people who have great influence in the Metro Detroit business community. We discuss all aspects of their journey, including the moments where they've had to draw deeply on their self-belief to achieve their vision. I will be your host, Keith Baldwin, with my co-host, Jordana Chefitz, sponsored by Regal Payments and JAC Digital, as well as our studio partner, Office Evolution of Troy. These conversations will potentially make you re-examine your beliefs about business, people, and life in general. Here's a taste of what's coming up today.
Connecting is not just meeting somebody.
It's not like one and done.
It's actually connecting. Yeah. And if you can't connect with everybody and you can't always get along with everybody, but you actually can do a lot more than you think if people would just try. But it takes a lot of emotional work, and that's hard. We're low on emotional fuel these days, I think.
Let's explore and scrutinize together as we unlock the mind of today's guest to provide you with inspiration and tangible takeaways that you can choose to apply in your life. Today's guest is the Mayor of Troy, Ethan Baker. Welcome, Ethan.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here.
Pleasure. Now, Ethan received his Bachelor of Arts in Political Science from University of Southern California and Juris Doctorate from Whittier College School of Law, graduating magna cum laude, and a Master of Public Affairs from the University of Michigan Gerald Ford School of Public Policy. He began practicing law in LA in 2006, and in 2009, he relocated to Michigan with his wife Bethany, who's a marriage and family therapist. They live in Troy with their 3 children, Arden, Canaan, and Avon. Now, being the mayor, so it's a good title, right?
Mayor's a great title, not gonna lie, it is a great title.
Now, there's other people who've been mayor, and I was trying to think of them, and there's Pete Buttigieg, who was mayor of South Bend, Indiana, and he's ran for president and down on Capitol Hill, and Jerry Springer, who was mayor of Cincinnati, and obviously had a famous talk show. Yeah. So where's your career next? Are you going to do a Springer-type talk show, or are you going to be on Capitol Hill in a few years?
So I'm in good company, I guess, with Springer and Buttigieg. Not sure. You know, I love being the mayor of Troy, so I'm here and happy doing it. I'm actually just finishing my first term and about to start my second term. But, you know, I love serving people. I love the city of Troy. So, I mean, any way I can serve in public service somehow is what I'm looking to do. But right now, I still feel like I have a lot to do in the city of Troy as the mayor. And so I'm really focused on that. But I do love serving, and I think we have a great country and a great opportunity for people to get involved and to do things. So I hope to continue to be a part of that.
Was being involved in public office or city council, when did that start crossing your mind? I know you joined the Troy Council in 15 and you became mayor in 19, but was it when you were on the West Coast or when you moved here you started thinking about it?
I get asked that question a lot and I never have a great answer for it, so we'll see how today's goes.
Kind of fell
I'm excited for your answer.
This might be the winning answer. I don't know. You know, I was mildly interested in politics growing up, not really big into it. I mean, it wasn't a big part of my life, as it is not for most kids and teenagers, right? In college, though, at USC, I ended up getting an internship for President and Mrs Reagan in their post-presidential office out in Los Angeles, and I got exposed to a lot of big-time politics stuff, right? So it got really interesting to me on that level. But even then, that's a former president in the post-presidential office. It's way beyond what someone's thinking about when they're in their early 20s. They hired me and I worked for the next 4 years and up until the president passed away. But even then, all through that time, I thought, I love politics. I love learning about the people who have served, and I got really involved in elections and campaigns and what was going to happen next. But I always thought if I was going to be further involved in politics, I'd be behind the scenes. Kind of like I did in President Reagan's office. Wow. I thought that I would be a staffer for somebody or working in that realm, because I think there's way more of those type of people in this country who are doing the great work of our elected officials than the actual elected officials. So I thought that would be fascinating and interesting. But it wasn't really until we moved here in 2009 that I started thinking, well, maybe I could do something like that. Maybe it is me. I got involved in my homeowners association right after we moved here. By chance, the realtor who'd sold us our house happened to be on the board of our HOA, lived in our neighborhood, and said, hey, you're a lawyer, right? And I said, yeah. And she goes, well, the lawyer we had on our board just moved to Grand Rapids, and do you want to be on our board? And I said, sure. Next year I was actually president of that board, and then I kind of just got involved. I realized, I like helping people, and I'm fairly good at it.
That's amazing to hear, because I feel like being on the board of an HOA does not always sound like the most fun.
Oh, it's the hardest. I'm still the president of our HOA today. I'm the mayor of Troy and the president of our HOA, and most days it's harder to be the president of the HOA board.
Wow.
I mean, truly, it's tough. And if you think about it, it's pretty straightforward. You're dealing with the people, their actual everyday lives in their houses, in their neighborhood, right? That's about
True.
as close to somebody as you can get. I always say local government, you feel the effects of local government decisions way more than you do state and federal government because
yeah.
we're dealing with your community. Imagine if it's your actual neighborhood and your houses, right? So I think that's why it can be so highly charged for HOAs. But by the time I was on the HOA board, I kind of, people in the neighborhood knew who I was and liked what I was doing in the neighborhood. We kind of did some new things for the community in our neighborhood directly, and it led to saying, okay, I guess I could get involved myself, and maybe I want to be a candidate, which is really difficult to just jump into. But I ended up getting elected to city council in Troy in 2015, and served for 4 years and got elected mayor in 2019. So it's an interesting kind of way it happens. It was never anything I planned. Some people have it like mapped out. I'm going to do this, and I was a political science major at USC, and I used to sit in those like lower level poli-sci classes, and I kind of would laugh because all of these people around me, I thought, oh, all these people think they're going to be senators or they're going to be president or something. And I'm like, none of you are. None of us are, right? That was kind of my take, and so I don't know. I guess I turned into one of those people.
Are any of your ex-classmates you still in touch with who've moved into that, or has your prediction come true that not many of them are?
You know what? I can't think of one from any of my political science undergrad classes that are actually elected officials. I happen to be the one, I think, and there may be some from different. Obviously, I can't keep in touch with all of them, but one of them is a Fox News contributor.
Okay.
She did
Cool.
okay. She's got a career in entertainment and in policy or in journalism, which is kind of neat, but most of them no, probably went on to law school and are lawyers or other things like that.
Yeah, I think an HOA would be starting in a baptism of fire. Because, we're coming from England, we don't really have those. I don't know over the past 20 years if they've sprung up, but it's not an English thing. And then you hear about it in America, and it's like the people telling you to cut your lawn is what the stereotype is.
It's cut your lawn, what color you can paint your house, and the things you can do. And
so if you can be popular doing that stuff, then that's not a bad achievement.
The trick is to throw community events. Have a lot of parties.
Oh.
They like the parties. That's what it came down to.
So what's your key to success being an HOA president?
The parties. Throwing community.
yeah?
No, really. I mean, honestly, it's just like being any kind of public official or elected. If you listen to people and you honestly try to help, but listening first. If you can listen to them and hear out what their concern is, whether it's about their neighbor's yard that they don't like or whatever it is, or that'll go a long way.
Right.
So just listen.
Now, you're from Northern California,
Yeah.
and which part?
So I grew up in a town called Chico, which is in the Sacramento Valley, pretty far north. When people out here think of Northern California, they think of San Francisco. That is Northern California, but I'm further north than that and inland. So it's about a 3-hour drive.
So you go down, you get your degrees, and then was the work with Reagan, was that your first role out of college?
That was, so I waited tables during college, and that was my first big thing, which is
What type of restaurant? Just a chain or just
a couple? Well, I started at Red Lobster,
Okay.
which is where I met my wife, actually. We both...
Cheesy biscuits.
Yeah, everyone loves those. We both worked at Red Lobster, and that's where we met in Studio City, California. And then I went to a restaurant that was more higher end up in the Burbank Hills called the Castaway. So that was kind of it was fancy. I was there for 5 years. So that's where I did most of my waiting tables. But I always say waiting tables is great for anybody. I hope younger people are still doing it because it's a great way to talk to people all the time, and you really learn a lot about yourself, and it's good for social skills. But that's my plug for waiting tables. But the Reagans were really my first professional job. And like I said, I got that internship my last semester of college at USC, and then they hired me to work.
So that was the last 4 years of his life you were there?
Yeah.
Did you interact with him much on a daily basis? Or?
Every day.
Every day?
I was with both him and Mrs. Reagan. Obviously, he had Alzheimer's, and his Alzheimer's progressed. When I first started, he had good days and bad days. As the time went on, he had more bad days than good days until eventually he passed away. But I spent a lot of time. Once they stopped coming into the office, we started bringing the office up to them. So I'd drive up to their house in Bel Air every day and bring them stuff and talk with them. And I stayed really close with Mrs. Reagan up until she passed in 2016. I mean, we were a pretty tight-knit group of people, but it was a pretty fantastic opportunity for someone so young at the time, and I didn't really realize it, as most young people don't, but it was pretty cool.
Yeah.
What'd you do for them?
A little bit of everything. So when I started, I was answering the phones, right, like a good intern, checking mail and going through, and as things advanced, I started writing on their behalf, statements, letters, dealing with the press, dealing with people. Then a big part of my job as morbid as this sounds, was working on updating and planning his big funeral that was going to happen at some point because everyone knew he was going to die, and it was on us to do it. Obviously, a president starts planning their funeral when they get elected president, so he had been had a working document going back to 1981, but a lot of things have changed.
What were some of his requests for his funeral?
He wanted to, for sure, have it end at sunset out at his presidential library. So that was the big thing. So everything had to be timed to that 7th day, and it was like a 7-day affair, and it was broadcast on TV. It was a big deal, internationally even. But his biggest request was he wanted to be interred at sunset at the Reagan Library, and he got his wish, and it was perfectly executed from that standpoint. But I spent a lot of time working on those funeral arrangements. As he was getting older and older, a lot of his contemporaries were dying themselves, and so that we kept having to change, who was going to be an honorary pallbearer, or who was going to speak, and those kind of things. So it sounds crazy, but it was
Makes sense.
If you paid any attention to it, or if you look back now, I mean, it was truly a big 7-day affair with multiple venues and locations and travel all over the country. I stayed in Los Angeles the whole time and ran the Los Angeles office while our chief of staff, Joanne Drake, traveled with Mrs. Reagan and the president's body throughout the country. But it was really, really interesting. Yeah. And I did so much more working for them. I just, it's
funny
a hard thing.
That's top of mind, and obviously it's a presidential funeral is a huge affair, but when you talk about your time working there, it's like, we're working on the funeral every day.
Yeah, and it wasn't like that. I mean, it just...
you see the news, someone's dead, need a new pallbearer.
Yeah, right. So my wife always says, Ethan, you don't talk enough about what your experience with the Reagans, and it's hard to sometimes put it into words exactly what a typical day was like. I mean, I was also going to law school at night, so I was tired, right? I mean, you're working and going to school at night, and I mean, some of my favorite things. I mean, I used to sneak the president In-N-Out burger and French fries because Mrs. Reagan didn't want him to eat that stuff, but she'd leave for the day, and we'd time it, so I'd go pick up In-N-Out, a cheeseburger and milkshake and fries, and then run it up to the house, and he'd eat it. And he had a great team of nurses and staff up at the house too, and so I mean, we had a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And
how old was he when he died again?
He was 93.
Okay.
93.
So in that first year or two, when he was still able to have some conversations before the disease got too bad for him, what were some pearls of wisdom that he maybe shared? Or
we used to talk about all kinds of things. I mean, we talked a lot about, I don't take credit for it today, but I talk a lot about it, but the power of relationship building. Yeah. He was really big on the power of relationships, and how you can get a lot more done if you work with somebody than against them. And we seem to have lost that today in politics, but that was definitely his style. And he used to tell me stories all the time about, people. Of course, I knew the people because they were, famous politicians or experiences he had. But he was really big on that. And he really stressed the importance of just not making enemies, making friends as best you could, because you really could get things done for the good of the country, and that could be applied anywhere in any opportunity or any setting. And he was an optimist, and he was warm and kind and really wanted the best for people.
Yeah, it's funny in a way looking back, because Reagan and Thatcher in England, that era, they were not polarizing when you look back now. I mean, but then they polarized a bit, but now it's nothing compared to today.
Yeah.
Do you think you would be dismayed at the state of U.S. politics today?
Yeah, I get asked that question quite a bit. I think certainly from a demeanor standpoint and from how things have gotten so ugly, it's just not who he was, right? So that would be very difficult for him to accept. And I think he would do everything he could in his power, if he were in a position of power still, to try to keep that from happening, to keep it positive, to keep it from doing that. And so would he be dismayed? Probably by some people. He also very much believed in, the people of this country are the ones that are really in charge. And so I think part of him would think, if this is what the people are wanting and electing, then, power to them. That's what they get. I mean, that's how it is. So I don't know. I know Mrs. Reagan. I actually, Mrs. Reagan and I talked very regularly up until she passed away in March of 2016. So we kind of were going through the early 2016 election together. And we talked about things. And, she was also dismayed. She just was not the Reagans were very much about showing positivity and showing, having a certain air of elegance, I guess is one word. And, when you're swearing at somebody or calling somebody names, that was not really what they were about. So it kind of, she was a little bit more dismayed probably than the president would have been.
Yeah. Who are some historical leaders that you admire? I assume Reagan may be one, but who else has kind of formed your own style of leadership?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, obviously, President Reagan's played a big part in my life, so that would be an easy one. I mean, when you look back at some of the more historical figures, I think all politicians kind of answer the same people. You know, we talk about, oh, George Washington was really amazing, and Abraham Lincoln, and we talk about these presidents. But honestly, I don't know that I could say any specific leader has really influenced me. I've tried to pick up as much as I could from a lot of different people. I read a lot. I've read a lot over the years. I'm someone who firmly believes there's good in everybody. I should be careful saying that these days, but most people, there's good in most people, right? And you pick up the good and you try to realize what you need to not do to have the bad, right? And so you look at someone like, partisanship makes it hard these days, but like I can look back at all of the presidents we've had over the 20th century and into the 21st century, and I think, well, gosh, I wish I had this aspect from this one, and obviously I'm not going to do what that one did. But you look at everybody. So I try to be as much of a sponge as possible and absorb wherever I can. And then even on the local level, I mean, there's people here in the city of Troy that have been great leaders that I've kind of tried to pick up some of their good habits from. And I think, again, if we can all keep kind of an open mind and look to find the good in people, we'll realize we can make a difference that way.
Yeah. So what made you move to Michigan in the first place?
My wife, Bethany's from Michigan.
Okay.
Originally. Well, she actually was born in New Jersey and lived in New York for a little bit, and then her family moved to Michigan and Southeast Michigan.
So what was she doing now that Red Lobster?
Yeah, so we, when I moved to LA to go to school, she moved to LA to be an actress.
Okay.
And I was actually doing acting too, so we both transferred into that Studio City Red Lobster, and that's how we met, right at the same time. So we've been together a long time. And but anyway, so we were there for 12 years, and then we started having children, and it just made sense to move out here. And 2009 was a terrible time in the economy for the country, right? It was a great time to buy a house in Michigan, coming from California especially, because everyone was leaving Michigan. So I always joke we were the only people that moved into Michigan in 2009. And
yeah, U-Haul truck going.
Yeah, right. It was like traffic was great going in. But we've loved it. I mean, we chose Troy for a number of reasons and ended up being here, and it's been wonderful. It's been great for the kids, and we've had another kid since we've lived here, and obviously we've kind of built ourselves into the community, which is good. Yeah.
And then now I know your wife is a family therapist, and your work with the people, you guys together deal with people, and whether it be in the home level, the council level. Right. Obviously, she doesn't go into detail for HIPAA regulations, but what would you say that the tenor is these days of just life out there as mental health struggles and just how that affects the community as a whole? Is there a crisis out there? Is everyone kind of having issues, or is it kind of the same as it always has been, your kind of feel?
I think there is a mental health crisis. Crisis is a tough word. I mean, how do you define a crisis, right? But there's always been mental health challenges, I think.
Right.
And people are more apt to talk about it now. So I don't know how you quantify that change, but she's a certified emotionally focused therapist. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist. She's a PhD in marriage and family therapy. So she's been doing this a long time and has a lot of experience. And she does share certain trends, obviously not the specifics, but it is, I see it as mayor, and she sees it obviously, one-on-one with her clients. People are struggling, and there's just so much pressure these days. There's so much polarization. There's so much anger. I think COVID's made it a lot worse too, coming out of that. We still have all the ramifications of that and all of the things that did to our mental health. And really, we see, obviously, what's happening to our students' mental health, and it's changed a lot, I think. And I don't really know the reasons why, and I don't really know how we get out of it. But obviously, I'm a big proponent for therapy and any kind of mental health work you can do, and that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, right? Some people are still uncomfortable going and sitting and talking to a therapist, but there are other avenues, and it's kind of neat to see the evolution of some of the online therapy apps or aspects and things you can do that might actually be a little more palatable for somebody. To log in and kind of either chat with somebody on a screen as opposed to going and sitting in a room with a couch and a chair. That feels kind of old school for a lot of people. But I don't know. I hope that people can find the way to get the mental health services they need. Obviously, there's a huge volume of different kinds of issues, right, all the way up to mental health diseases and disorders where that creates a lot of problems. But even just the stress and the anxiety that a lot of younger people are facing today is really terrifying.
100%. It's also way less taboo to talk about now than it was 20 years ago.
100%, which I think is a big part of the step. And what I've learned now is from Bethany is, she's got a wait list all the time. I mean, it's hard to get good mental health therapists and hard to get into them. And there is a shortage of them in the field. And so as a result, they've all been working so hard, especially through COVID.
Yeah.
And they're all getting burnt out, right? And there's not enough people coming through a system that are going to be good qualified therapists to help. And as the taboo goes away and the stigma goes away, that means there's more of a demand, but there's not enough therapists to get it done. So I hope more people go into the field.
Well, one other thing I was going to touch on, you mentioned COVID. You became mayor in 2019. I was like, well, that's a great time to become mayor. It's like I'm finally mayor. I can do all these policies, and then suddenly COVID smacks you in the face. That must have been pretty intense. And you mentioned the schools. I was thinking, handling all the schools through COVID. And we've talked about politicization. You must have had some pretty crazy town hall meetings with people on both sides getting quite animated. Let's start with the schools. How was that, and how are the schools? I know Athens and Troy are big schools. Yeah. How was handling that through the crisis?
Well, I can say first, as the mayor, I actually don't deal with the schools directly. We have a school board and a school superintendent, so it was really easy for me to deal with the schools during COVID. I mean, to a certain extent. Obviously, our school district's a big part of our city, and if I don't know what's going on in our schools, it's probably not a great thing if you're the mayor, right? So I keep in touch. I'm very close with our superintendent, and I work with the school board as best I can. But even that, when the school decisions were being made, that obviously there is an expectation that the mayor has something to do with it, or the city government's involved, and we had to also update our own policies. We had virtual city council meetings for a year, which had never happened. Obviously, it happened to a lot of different people. I got elected in November of 2019, and we get sworn in a week later here. So I had a couple months of normalcy as the mayor, and then COVID happens. And you're absolutely right, Keith. Like, I went from, I'm mayor, I've got all these ideas, we're going to do all these things, to everything shut down, and all we could focus on was public health and making sure that, we could still have elections when that time came, that our police officers and our fire, that everyone was doing everything they needed to do and not getting sick. And you have to remember, like, early COVID, none of us knew what was going on.
Yeah.
And no one really knew what it was going to be like, and you didn't know if one police officer got sick, was the whole police department going to die? I mean, that sounds dramatic, but that was kind of the fear, right? I mean, and so there were a lot of precautions taken, and here in the city of Troy, we don't have our own public health department. We rely on the county's public health department. So in a way, we were able to just say, we're going to follow the county's rules, and they're going to take the lead on this, which was sometimes in conflict with maybe some of us at City Hall thought should be done, certainly some of our residents. So that's where we kind of got the friction. So it was easy for us to say, the county's handling this, we're following the county's orders. But there were times when I felt like, I would do things a little differently if it was just in my control. And that was a little bit of a struggle. And the residents of Troy, I think, for the most part, pretty respectful, caring community. Not a lot of vitriol that you saw in a lot of other communities.
It's good to hear.
We also didn't go out and take big steps ahead of a lot of things and try to make big points. I think the mistake that some politicians made during COVID and still make today is they take a stand to get some press or to get some attention, and then it draws attention to you also for all the negative reasons, right?
Right.
If you don't do that in the first place and you just kind of do your job, you don't whip up people.
Exactly.
Politicians whip up people for different purposes all the time. But I thought for COVID especially, we didn't want to be in the business of putting out inflammatory social media posts on the city's handles, making big statements and holding press conferences on things that really didn't matter to us. And I saw other communities doing that. So we tried to lay low, do the essential business of the city, keep our residents safe. Obviously, that was the number one thing. And also try to remember that eventually we were going to have to get out of COVID, and it's going to go back to normal. So what is that going to mean? We need to be prepared for that when that time did come.
What
People
what
get
has
upset.
been the biggest criticism or angry comment you've received since you've been mayor?
There's still, some of the bread and butter issues in the city of Troy still are what people care about most. So the development issues, people don't like it when you put in apartments next to their single-family house, right? So we get a lot of people who come to our council meetings for public comment when there's any kind of, potentially controversial development project. Some of those residents tend to be a little more pointed and, make accusations of clearly, I'm making money on the side with these real estate deals, which I'm not, obviously. And it's usually not directed just at me. It's directed at all of us. I've been, like I said, I'm not somebody who goes out and tries to just piss people off.
Right.
If you smile with them and listen to them, they're usually not going to be as angry towards you, right? Even if they
goes a
don't
long
agree with
way.
what you're doing. It's hard to do sometimes.
My only other Troy business is what is happening with the old Kmart site was the other question.
Oh, that's actually a timely question, finally. It's been vacant for almost 20 years.
Okay.
When Kmart when Sears took over and they moved to Chicago, they moved their corporate headquarters there. That building's been vacant, I think, since 2004 or 2005. Back before the Great Recession of 2008, there was a big development plan to do this Pavilions of Troy. It was like an outdoor entertainment area with shopping and all kinds of great things. Then the economy tanked, and they're like, oh, we can't do that. So then at that point, the owners of Somerset Collection, who are right across the street, bought that property and basically have just held on to it all these years. And they basically realized, hey, if we want to control what's going to go there and be right next door to our very expensive retail collection, Somerset is, right, we better own it. So they've bought it, and they've sat on it. And over the years, they've had different potential development projects in mind, but something's always happened, kept it from moving forward. Right before COVID, actually, my last public event before COVID was with the owner of Somerset Collection at a mayor's meeting, South Oakland County Mayor's Association dinner that we hosted here in Troy. And Nate Forbes, who is the managing partner of Somerset, he was presenting potentially what their big mixed-use development plan was going to be. And it was heavily office-based, obviously, right? And then COVID happened. Like, actually, while we were there, I think Tom Hanks and Rita Wilson announced they had COVID. Remember when that was? So and then the governor shut down the schools the next. It was that was when it happened. So, obviously, economy changes everything. But now, finally, I can say Kmart. You see, there's fencing up around it. They've pulled a demolition permit. They're bringing down the building. It's going to be about a 9-month process because there's a lot of precious metals in there and some environmental concerns they have to work on. It's a 40-acre parcel. I would argue that it's the most valuable 40-acre parcel probably in our state because of our location and where it is in relation to everything. I can't make any big announcements yet. I wish I could do it here on the Self-Belief podcast, but there will be a great development there. I've always said if the owners of Somerset own it, they're not going to do anything there that's going to take away the value of their very valuable retail collection, right? So it's going to be nice and high-end, whatever it is. My safe guess is that it'll be mixed use also. I think there'll be some residential component. There'll be probably a little bit of retail that's not going to compete with Somerset, but enhance Somerset. I'm sure there'll be some restaurants because Troy does restaurants well. And I'm assuming there'll be some office, and I think I can safely say that, they're working on getting a big kind of an anchor tenant, I guess, to go into that space, and then everything will kind of build around it. So I'm excited about it. Listen, it's the question I get more than anything. I'm surprised we're this far into it before you asked, but it's
I was trying to keep out
deal.
of Troy business, trying to more focus on your journey, but that for Troy residents, I guess that was a big deal.
It's a big deal, and I'm excited that we're finally.
And I hadn't realized it had been sitting there 20 years.
That's crazy.
That's a long time to just sit.
It's a really cool building, but it's an obsolete building, so they couldn't really repurpose it. They're tearing it down, and I think Troy residents are excited about that. And honestly, not just Troy people. Everybody who knows this area in Metro Detroit, whether they're coming to Somerset or to our restaurants on Big Beaver or whatever, they know that property, and they know that it's been there a long time, and it's time to do something.
Yeah, so we talk about that 20-year time span. Obviously, I live in Detroit, and 20 years ago, Detroit looks a lot different to it does now. So it's had a lot of growth and resurgence. And I know people in Macomb County, a lot of areas that were farmland are now residential developments. So both those areas have had big growth. How's Troy keeping up with some of the neighboring areas in terms of growth recently?
Well, I think Troy's big growth happened in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, right? It went from I think population tripled in that time. And there was a lot of development.
When did the Somerset Mall move in? What year?
Well, Somerset initially started with the Saks. It was a
Okay.
standalone Saks Fifth Avenue in 1966 or 67.
that's
so
very cool.
yeah, because Sam Frankel was the visionary there, and he basically said, I think people are gonna not want to go downtown Detroit all the time to shop. There's a lot of people in Bloomfield Hills that would love to just come right here. And so he convinced Saks to build this standalone Saks right here on Big Beaver. And at the time, Big Beaver was a 2-lane road, essentially had some farms on it as well.
Huh.
And so he
A farm and a Saks. I can see that.
it made perfect sense. No, I mean, the joke is, so as he was building out, he realized, okay, well, let's do more than just Saks. Let's
Okay.
build. It started with the South Side. And it was just one level at the time. But as he was trying to get these big retailers to come in, we'd host people from New York all the time. He would always bring them in from the Birmingham side because it looked much more higher end and nicer.
Okay.
So if he would have come in from the east side, it was farms and dirt roads. So he would always tell them, we're going to come in this way because there's so much development going on down there. And it's kind of a big joke. But, so that was the late 60s that all started building. It wasn't until mid-90s, that the north side, so the mall was completed with the big walkover. And so by the mid-90s, pretty much Somerset was what it was. And by then, pretty much the city was mostly, a lot of the growth had happened, but even on the north part of the city, it was still a lot of farm fields. And so the development in Troy has pretty much slowed down from a standpoint of we don't have any big farms left for you to build a big subdivision. We've got some wooded areas that our residents want us to protect as best we can, and we've got some tree ordinances, and we do a lot to try to protect that. So we're doing a lot of infill development. I think that Troy's goal is to stay relevant, right? I mean, when you've got blank canvas out there to build new things, it's hard for a city who's built out to compete with things like that. So we're always trying to piece together, existing parcels. What can we do to keep people coming to Troy? We're very fortunate. We have I-75, obviously.
Right.
So people are always going to come through Troy. There's going to be a lot of access. We're the third or fourth largest property value in the state of Michigan. We've got a lot of business, a lot of valuable property. So people are going to keep coming here. But, our goal is to make it relevant for the next several decades. And, we're working on an updated master plan right now that kind of addresses some of those things. You see all the development downtown Detroit. I think it's great. It's pretty localized to, Midtown and then down by
The Hudson's.
right.
Campus
All
Marshes,
the Dan Gilbert property, frankly.
Right.
But if you look at the rest of the city of Detroit, it is very much untouched in a lot of ways. And, so hopefully
True.
some of that value can spread out and help the city as a whole. Macomb County's had a huge, boom of development. We're doing what we can. I mean, people want to still be in Troy, so it makes us at the top of the list for a lot of people. But our development projects are much smaller, other than the Kmart site. For the most part, it's more creative infill type development.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of diversity in Troy as well. I'm from England, as we know, and people think fish and chips is the main dish of England, but it's actually Indian curry. We love curry in England.
Wow.
And because there's a lot of history there, and you think there's a fish and chip shop in every corner. There's actually a curry shop. So I like all the Indian restaurants in Troy.
Oh, it's good for you. It's like home.
Yeah,
Right.
it's like home,
Yeah.
kind of. That's a major population, right, for Troy, the Indian population. What do you do to help serve them? Anything specific, or?
Yeah, that's another. I mean, that's a challenge that we all face, right? So, City of Troy is 29% foreign-born, which is a big number if you think about it. I mean, it doesn't. I mean, if you really think about it, it's a lot. And most of the people who have come to the city of Troy are from India or from China, primarily, right? Southeast Asia, also, that area, and I think that there's a couple different ways to look at it. Obviously, their kids are doing really well in our schools, and so I think some of the kids are having an easier time because they're coming up in our school system, and that becomes a very organic way to become part of the community. Some of the parents and the multi-generational aspect, it is a little bit tougher. I found that, especially in India, there's a skepticism of public officials and government, or they assume that you either gotta bribe or you gotta be in with somebody to get anything with government. And we're very approachable here in the United States, which is something that it's a hard thing to explain. So I've done a lot of work working with different community groups and houses of worship and going around talking to people saying, hey, what, I'm approachable. Let's get you involved in the city somehow. We want to make sure you feel like you've got the representation you need and that you're a part of our community. And it's sometimes successful and it's sometimes not, right? I mean, it's different for everybody, but we've got a number of boards and committees in the city of Troy that are volunteer boards and that we appoint, either the mayor appoints or the city council appoints. And we're trying to make those boards and committees look and feel more like our community, because we figure it'll give better representation. But it doesn't mean that I can't represent somebody from India just as well as somebody from India could, right? There's a lot of different ways to look at it, and we do our best. And there's a lot of, I think there's 57 houses of worship in the city of Troy. All different types of people live in the city of Troy, and
that's a lot of places.
It is, and we're trying to make everybody feel welcome and at home. And I think some days we do a really good job. Other days, people still have concerns, and that's part of it. And we try to learn and grow from it if we ever do step in it, or if we're ever trying to make a difference. We talk about the restaurants, and obviously we have some great Indian restaurants. We have great restaurants all throughout, but we still are primarily focused on typical Judeo-Christian holidays, right? We do a Christmas tree lighting. We do that's the big one we do, but we're trying to get some more Diwali celebrations brought in. Obviously, that you want everybody to feel like it's not just about Christmas or Christianity.
If it's a celebration with drink and great food, then people get behind it no matter what.
That's
right?
kind of how you do it. We've got a Global Troy Advisory Committee, which is a volunteer group that I chair as the mayor, and we're trying to bring the multicultural aspect of the city of Troy out into the community. Some of it's a little bit of education for city staff. Some of it's about just getting out and doing great community events and these international fairs. They do a big international day at our Troy Family Days event where it's different cultural dancing from throughout the community. I mean, it is so much. You talk about food and drink. People are always happy with food and drink. The more we can do that, the better, and that helps bridge a lot of divides, I think.
Yeah.
So,
well, a few somewhat more quick-fire questions, but I just want to touch on your leadership style. A quote from MLK I've always liked is that ultimately a genuine leader is not a searcher for consensus, but a molder of consensus. So as the leader of the Troy Council, what's a couple of instances where you had to grab people and mold them into a consensus on an issue?
Oh, that's a good question. That's a good quote also. I think that part of leadership is actually leading, right? It's not just about holding your finger up in the wind and seeing where people want you to go. Sometimes you got to tell people they're not going to like this decision, but it's the right thing for them, and trying to get that. And I have a very educated, very willing to really tackle tough issues type council. So it's helped. Good listeners, good people. So I don't find myself having to mold them as much as some may, right?
Right.
Every now and then there's a few things, but I think there's been some opportunities. We had a big change with our fire department, and then we have a volunteer fire department primarily, most of our 140 volunteer firefighters, and we had an incentive program, and I found myself kind of having to seek consensus by molding them to understand some of the issues that we were facing. Partly because I have more information just because of my role, right? I think that's a big part of it, but trying to get people to understand where the issues really are, because you get whipped around a lot by residents and by other people, and our job is not to represent just small factions of groups or certain activists. It's really to try to represent everybody, and that can be hard. And I think we've all stepped in it where we've found ourselves kind of advocating for one very specific group and not realizing there's bigger consequences. So I've tried to be the person of reason where we bring everybody together and get them to. But other issues, sometimes on some development projects, I've kind of had to seek consensus and get them to do it. Yeah. Kind of understand it from a different perspective. But again, I almost feel bad saying that because this is a council that's pretty on top of it, right? I mean, it's not they're not really out on the reservation too far. We've got every now and then there's some stray things that get said or get done, and you think, oh, I wish we were kind of in a different place. But I don't know. To be honest with you, I think moving forward, this next term of mine, I just have a feeling I'm going to have to do a little more of that. I think COVID slowed things down, kind of brought us all down a little bit and even a little bit more together. But at this next point, we've got some big decisions to make as it relates to how the city's going to move forward. And I think my job's going to be a little harder. And part of it will be because the council is going to have their own ideas. And I've already heard some things from some of them that make me think, oh, that's not what I think. And I've got to figure out how we're going to make this work.
When's your next term run to?
It is, so I got elected in November 19. November 23 starts the new term.
Okay.
So it'll go to 27. It's 4-year terms.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
which feels like forever from now. But
And now, is a mayor allowed to do 2 terms and that's it, or you can do multiple?
City of Troy has term limits, so I can serve 2 terms as mayor. And I
Okay.
served 1 term as council. I could technically go back and try to serve 2 more terms as a council member. I would never.
Right.
But we did have a mayor, Gene Stein, who served 2 terms as mayor and then went back and served another term on council.
Wow.
Because she just loved it so much, I guess.
So after this term, this is when you're off to do your Springer talk show.
Yeah, that's right. That I
That's right.
become my now. Sounds like kind of fun. I mean,
That's right. You never know. You never know. What's one moment where luck's played a role? I know obviously you create your own luck to an extent, but what was your sliding doors moment throughout your life?
not just related to more recent political stuff, just in
anytime.
general. I always say this is going to sound horribly corny, but meeting my wife has been like somebody was looking out for me, and I
Very
think luck
sweet.
played a role. No, it's sweet, but it's also like
If you
very
went
practical.
to
and
Olive
true.
Garden instead of Red Lobster.
If I would have transferred to a different restaurant, maybe it wouldn't happen. I don't know. You know, I think that I find myself extremely lucky that Bethany came into my life when she did.
Right.
And I was very young, and that's not very common these days. I think most people are starting relationships later in life, and Bethany and I have been together since I was a freshman in college, right?
Wow.
So, which is young. Especially as I have somebody who's a junior in high school. I think, oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's a little crazy. But so I always say the luckiest thing that's ever happened to me is meeting Bethany, because she is a partner in every way in my life. Like, she really is something spectacular. So I think that's the number one thing I always go to. The other thing is I probably from a professional standpoint, getting the connecting with the chief of staff for President Reagan and getting that job was a little bit of luck, and I think something lined up. And I don't know exactly what it was because I wasn't politically connected. I was very naive at the time. I didn't even really know what I was interviewing for, what I was calling about. But I was able to connect with her. She was from Northern California also. We connected her quickly on that. And
Personal level.
I think it just kind of took off that way. And I do think there's a lot of luck involved in that. And that's set me off on a
Right.
certain tangent.
Well, as
Or-
we talked about in the podcast, like really most weeks talk about community and relationships, and that's exactly what you're talking about today.
Yeah, well, that's all I talk about.
Yeah.
It's
No, I
very
mean,
important.
it's-
And anywhere in business, like being a mayor of a town, owning a small business, it's really all about those relationships and those community. And that's how you got with Reagan. That's how you got that job. So it's like how you even got your Troy job and your HOA job. It's all about connecting with people.
Yeah. Well, and I think so. Connection is the number one thing we can do as human beings to lead like happy and successful lives, right? And that is across all sectors and business especially. I mean, and it has to be real connection. I think some people, my biggest pet peeve is networking events where people just go and they're kind of checking the box by going to a networking event. Or, oh, you meet somebody and, oh, it's so nice to meet you and great. And you talk about bullshit for a while.
Right.
And it's like, and then you take their card or whatever you do these days electronically and you think, oh, good, I did that. And now I've just done something really great. And then you either drop that connection by not following up, or then you like awkwardly ask that person for something without actually making a real connection. I mean, that's the biggest mistake I think people make. And then there's a lot of business development groups out there right now, and whether.
Yeah.
And it drives me nuts though to think that people. It's not just like. Connecting is not just meeting somebody.
It's not like one
it's
and done.
actually connecting,
Yeah.
and if you can't connect with everybody, and you can't always like get along with everybody, but you actually can do a lot more than you think if people would just try. But it takes a lot of emotional work, and that's hard. We're low on emotional fuel these days, I think.
Yeah, and I guess a
couldn't
lot
agree more.
is about what the intention you go in. Are you intending to go to that networking meeting to see who you meet and have some interesting conversations? Or it's like, oh, okay, I've got to meet this person, got to meet that person, and just, like you say, checking off boxes, which leads to less genuine conversations.
It's almost like you have to go into a networking meeting thinking, okay, or like going to BNI, like, hey, I'm not here to get business. I'm here to meet people and talk and connect. And like when I started a business a long time ago, I would go to networking events and I'd be like, okay, I have to meet this person. Now I go in thinking I want to meet people, have relationships, and maybe in 3 months we'll work together. Like for
Right.
me, it's not about, oh, I'm going to meet Keith and we're going to do business together tomorrow. And that's a hard lesson to learn for a lot of people.
And it is like, and it's the same in politics, it's the same anything, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you really have to foster those relationships, but it is your mindset, right? If you can make it about, I'm just going to go meet some nice people today,
Yes.
and I'm going to put my best self forward, And those people will end up liking you. And then if they remember you, they're going to say, oh, you know what? I want to work with Jordan on this. And that's how it's going to work. But if you go in trying to sell yourself or thinking I'm going to get X amount of dollars out of this meeting, because I think it's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah. Yeah. In one of our past episodes, we talked about full commission sales, something I've done in the past, and that can be stressful. And if you go in with that stress and walk in as like, I've got to make this sale, then you're walking in with dollar signs in your eyes, and people see that.
Yep.
You know, when you're more relaxed and it's like, let's have a conversation, see if what I have can benefit you, and there's some synergy, then everyone wins.
Yeah.
And even going back to what you said about Mr. Reagan, President Reagan, from the beginning, that he was all about relationships. I mean, that's what it is.
I agree.
Well, last couple ones. What do you do to focus on personal growth? Do a lot of reading, do a lot of, or just listen to your wife. She sounds like she's
great.
got a PhD,
Listen, Bethany,
right?
If everybody had a Bethany, we'd all be much
she's
better
your
off.
personal counselor.
I really, and she, I mean, like it or not, she is. I mean, good for her. It's hard for her, but she's wonderful. But, I try to do a lot of things. I think the more people I can talk to, the more diversity of thought I can come in contact with is better for me. It's going to help me think of things in a different way. It's going to help me grow. Obviously, there's a whole, mental and physical component. I try to exercise some. I try to eat healthy. Try to do all those things that are like going to be good for you, because I think we do better in life if we actually are taking care of ourselves in that way too. I don't have as much time to read as I used to. I used to love to read, mostly nonfiction, right? And I'd learn a lot through that way. So now I try to get it in shorter bites and here and there, and it's tough. Talking to people is what I do, whether as a lawyer or whether as a politician, but listening is more important.
So talking about the future, I know I joked about, some mayors go on to higher political office, some go into TV, some do whatever, and I don't want to be as cliche as saying, what do you want to do in 10 years? Right. I want to talk, maybe as we all kind of go through our careers and think about our legacy at the time, whatever you end up doing, what would you hope that maybe your kids look back on and think is your legacy, one maybe as a dad and one as a person's work, a person's career? What would you hope are the main themes of your legacy as people look back on it?
Yeah, I think so. My kids are extremely important to me. We haven't talked about this, but I prioritize my schedule around my kids. For the most part, Bethany and I take them all to school every morning and do our best to pick them up. Our oldest drives now, so that's throwing a little bit of a wrench in that tire. But my schedule is driven primarily by what my kids are first, because I think that's really important. I was an only child with a single mom, much different scenario than what my kids are having now. So I've made sure to have that in my kids' life. And my kids have seen me grow up, or they've grown up seeing me in public service and somewhat in the public light. I mean, Mayor of Troy's not exactly Oprah or Jerry Springer for that matter, but we're not that big of a city, but I really hope I've instilled in them the value of public service and the value of truly meeting and understanding people. So much about listening and relationship building is actually just about understanding, and if human beings would do more of that in general, theoretically there's less conflict, there's less issues, not just here but throughout the world, right? And so I think part of my hopeful legacy is that my kids will understand the value of that and what it means to be a good human being and to listen and to understand other people. That's a big part of it. From a more of a professional standpoint, looking forward, legacy is kind of a funny thing. I feel too young to talk about legacy, and yet as I go into a second term as mayor, you start to think about what have I accomplished and what am I going to do? I'd love to serve in the public service way as long as possible. I mean, I really do enjoy it. I think it's a great way to be involved in a community. It's a great way to make a difference. And I think we do need good people in these roles and in government in general. And there's a thirst for that in our country of people wanting kind people or people that, you need people that are going to be smart enough. You need people that are going to have good character and all that. But you also want people that you can, I don't know if look up to is the right word, because I think we may be past that a little bit. But remember, we used to really revere our politicians, or we used to really look up to even lawyers, and now everyone hates lawyers. And so I always joke, I'm a lawyer and a politician, like the two most hated professions in America. But, if I could do anything to kind of turn some of that around and say, hey, there are still good people serving, and, we can make a difference in people's lives by being good people, I would love to have that. And whether that's in state government or federal government somehow, if I move on from the city of Troy someday, I'd be open to that. That said, in 10 years, I'd like to be doing something that fulfills me, obviously doesn't disrupt my family too much. Mm-hmm. Happiness is kind of a cliche, but wow, if I could stay happy or find, another path to happiness in some respect, I think that would be great too. We only get one life, at least here on Earth, right? And it is sometimes painfully too short for people, and we see a lot of that. It seems awful. I'm entering the stage of my life now where people that are kind of contemporaries are dying suddenly, and you think, wow, they're really young, and then you're like, oh, wait, that could be me. And so I focus a lot on that. And the last bit, from my kids' standpoint and my family standpoint, I've always said, I would love to go as far in public service as I can, as long as my kids and family are safe. I worry about safety and security a lot, and I think that has to be a consideration these days that didn't used to be so much of a consideration. But safety and security, some happiness, I don't know. If we can make that work, I'm all for it.
Yeah. Well, we've really appreciated having you on, and we would love to have you back on, and maybe as a guest interviewer.
That would be a lot of fun. I would love to do it.
Keith.
Jordana, let's get to the heart of the matter, Mr. Mayor Ethan Baker.
Let's do it. So yeah, I loved his episode, and really what I loved also was him talking about Reagan and how he just called up and they were like, okay, you can have the job. And also how he brought the past president in and out. And I thought it was very humbling, and I thought that it was amazing how he took that experience to being the mayor of Troy.
Yeah, what a great life experience straight out of college to be able to work with someone so historically important and get to know them on a personal level. And I think that started the ball rolling for his zeal for public service. And he talked about that being a mayor as well, that, kind of joked that, sometimes being a politician, a public official and a lawyer are two not hated professions, but really, when you do them well, they're positions of service. You're a lawyer to help your clients. You're in public service to help people. And I really got that feeling with Ethan that he really enjoys helping people.
Yes, it was honestly great, and I can't wait him to be a potential guest co-host with us.
Yes, there are some exciting things in the works with Ethan maybe coming back on and doing some co-hosting. And I would say as well, we didn't touch on it as much as we normally do, but, those moments of self-belief, I feel like he's had a few. And the one main one is he went into being mayor with these great ideas, and within 3 months, he's dealing with COVID. And I really like the way he built consensus and got everyone on board, wasn't hasty in some of his decisions, and really led Troy through that tough time. Yeah,
and I'm excited for his other reign of Troy starting in just a few days, actually.
That's right. Is he going to be the king if he's going to reign Troy? Or just the mayor? He may be king of Troy. Coming up.
It's a long episode. This one's getting stronger than the last.
Why are you mayor? You should be king of Troy. That sounds better.
Let's anoint him king of Troy.
Yes,
unopposed.
That makes his wife Bethany the queen.
Exactly.
So there we go. All right. Well, thanks for listening. Reach out to us on social channels. You can always email at hosts@selfbeliefpodcast.com. Look for us on YouTube and Instagram.
And don't forget to rate us. We'd love a 5-star review from you. Thank you for listening, and we'll chat with you next time.
Thanks. Bye. As a business owner, if the answer to the question, who does your credit card processing, is just, I'm not sure, or my bank, I think, then you are obviously not receiving the royal treatment you deserve. Regal Payments helps businesses accept payments in the most efficient and cost-effective ways possible. And at Regal, we treat you like royalty. And in a good way, we're not going to chop off your head or write crazy stories about you in the tabloids. Think of Regal Payments like the King's Butler. We'll be catering to all you and your royal subjects' needs to get the best payment experience possible. Contact Regal today to see how we may help you and serve you. RegalPayments.com or Keith@RegalPayments.com.